I think they're equally culpable and equally as evil, but even the word evil doesn't seem to fit to it just seems to be an understatement.
On Moorhouse Street, in the suburb of Willagee, most people would have described it as a quiet, peaceful place to live. People felt safe leaving their shoes out at night and their cars parked out the front. Number 3 did not stand out from the rest, not yet. In the spring of 1986, neighbours saw a quiet couple come and go. Sometimes they smoked together on the porch. Sometimes David worked on cars. Sometimes Catherine walked the dog. There was no screaming, no disturbances, and no signs that behind closed curtains, 5 women were being brought inside. 4 would never leave. David John Birnie had been slowly drifting through Perth long before he ever killed anyone. As a boy, he grew up in a home that people later struggled to describe without hesitation. There were stories, mostly whispered, unproven, but all the same, were persistent about alcoholism, incest, and neglect that bordered on cruelty. Children were rarely fed, the house was always filthy, and the normal family structure was completely absent. At 15, he left school and would take on a job at the Ascot racecourse as a jockey apprentice. While he was staying at a boarding house, not too far from the racecourse, he broke into the room of an elderly woman who also lived in the same building. He wore stockings pulled over his head and stood above her, completely naked. David would attempt to sexually assault her. He was unsuccessful. As the word got out, he was fired from his job at the racecourse. Reports came in saying he would abuse horses and expose himself on several occasions. Many people working with him would note he had almost no empathy and would use excessive force against the animals in his care. It showed that even at his young age, something was not quite right. What began as a series of thefts and public indecency soon spiraled into home invasions and assault. In light of this intensifying criminal trajectory, Birnie was handed a 2-year sentence in a juvenile detention centre to address his history of breaking and entering and predatory behaviour. Catherine Harrison's early life was also one of tragedy. Born in South Africa in 1951, she lost her mum while giving birth to her newborn brother. Sadly, he would pass away only 2 days later. Afterwards, she was sent to Australia, to grandparents who tried to give her stability and a better life. But at 10 years old, she was forced back into the custody of a father who had already hurt her. It is here where she would suffer extreme abuse at the hands of her father, where he would treat her more like a wife or a partner rather than a daughter, and he reportedly told her that as long as she serviced him, she wouldn't have to do housework or chores, essentially grooming her into a role of domestic and sexual servitude. It is during this time that Catherine would meet David Birnie. Catherine was 12 at the time, David 15, together meeting right before David would go to juvenile detention. Once he was released at the age of 17, the two would become closer, because Catherine was under the legal age of consent and David was a known offender with a violent streak. The very association was enough to put them on the police's radar, eventually leading to Catherine being placed into juvenile detention as well. It would become difficult for them to continue their relationship, given that they were separated in different detention centres. But by the time Catherine was released, David was already back in prison for a more serious burglary charge. This time, however, he was tried as an adult. In some sick way, the two most likely saw themselves as a modern Romeo and Juliet. However, after pressure from her father and parole officers to clean up her life, Catherine would go on to marry Donald McLaughlin, after working for their family as a housekeeper. With him, she would have 7 children, but sadly, their firstborn would be fatally struck and killed by a car. But David was always there in the background, pulling her back. By 1985, Catherine left her husband and children behind to start a life with David, officially changing her name to Birnie, although they were never legally married. She was fully committed to David, and the two moved into the house that would later become a real-world nightmare. 3 Moorhouse Street. People describe their relationship as not one of love and compassion, but obsession or control. David's sexual demands were constant, fueled by a mix of heavy drinking and drug use. When they weren't lost in a haze of heroin, cannabis and pills, David was consuming massive amounts of alcohol, a combination that only fueled his aggression. To keep the cycle moving, they turned to a life of theft, stealing to fund the addictions that anchored their shared existence. As things got more intense between the two, so did David's desires. He began talking about fantasies that were no longer abstract. He didn't just want control. He wanted witnesses, participation, and proof of loyalty. And Catherine agreed. Mary was 22, a psychology student at the University of Western Australia with an organised mind and a bright future. She worked part-time at the university's Child Study Centre and was known for being both kind and cautious. Her encounter with David seemed like a stroke of luck for a student on a budget. David, working at a local tyre shop, had struck up a conversation about her car. He offered her a set of cheap tyres. It was a mundane, suburban interaction. They exchanged numbers, and Mary, believing she was dealing with a professional tradesman, agreed to the deal. On the night of October 6th, 1986, Mary told her boyfriend she was heading out to pick up the tyres and would be back shortly. She drove her small Mazda to 3 Moorhouse Street, arriving around 6:30 p.m. When she knocked, it wasn't just David who greeted her. Catherine was there too, providing the suburban bait, the false sense of security that a woman's presence offers. They invited her inside, just for a moment, to finalise the paperwork. The moment she stepped over the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The front door was bolted. Before she could react, David overpowered her. Inside the house, Mary was taken to the back bedroom. There, the organised world of a psychology student was replaced by a nightmare of chains and nylon cords. She was gagged and tethered to the bed frame. Catherine didn't just stand in the shadows. She sat on the bed, holding Mary's hand or stroking her hair in a twisted display of comfort, while David raped her. Catherine's participation was clinical. She wasn't there to comfort the victim. She was there to ensure David's needs were met. Later that night, they forced Mary into the back of their car, where they would drive nearly an hour southeast to the isolated Glen Eagle State Forest. Under the canopy of the jarrah trees, David used a nylon cord to strangle her. But for David, the murder wasn't enough. He was a man of dark curiosities. After she was dead, he used a knife to stab her multiple times. He had a theory that venting the body would prevent gases from building up, believing it would help the remains decompose or sink into the earth faster. David and Catherine worked together to dig a shallow grave in the dark forest floor. When the earth was level, they didn't flee in panic. They drove back to Willagee, returned to the house on Moorhouse Street, and went back to their lives. Susannah was 15. By all accounts, she was a typical teenager, trusting and a little rebellious. That afternoon, she had been at a friend's house before an argument broke out. Susannah left and decided to catch a bus home, but unfortunately, due to issues with public transport, she was unable to. This led her to hitchhike along the Stirling Highway, which at the time was not considered dangerous, especially between two close suburbs. When a white car pulled over, Susannah hesitated, until she saw Catherine in the passenger seat. That female presence was intentional. It made the trap look like a safe ride home. She didn't know she was stepping into a rolling cage. The Birnies took a different psychological approach with Susannah. To buy themselves time and prevent a massive police search, they forced the 15-year-old to sit at a table and write letters to her family. Under David's cold instruction, she wrote that she was okay, and that she just needed some time away to clear her head. It was a cruel form of hope.
Little Sue Candy, Kathy also got her to write 3 letters. Those 3 letters were then put into envelopes, and subsequently the first letter that Sue wrote was posted the day that she was killed. The second letter was posted a week later, and the third letter was posted 2 weeks after she was killed.
Susannah believed that if she provided these letters, if she was compliant and useful, they might eventually let her go. She didn't know she was writing her own disappearance. Just like Mary, Susannah was forced into the back room, chained and assaulted before driving her out to the same familiar hunting grounds in Glen Eagle State Forest. Once they arrived, David attempted to strangle Susannah with a nylon cord, but he couldn't finish the act. Whether it was the cord snapping or his own clumsiness, he stopped. Without a word of remorse or hesitation, he handed the cord to Catherine. David would test Catherine's loyalty as he demanded that she was the one to finish it. This was the moment that Catherine transitioned from an accomplice to a primary killer. She took the cord and completed the strangulation herself. She would later tell police with a chilling detachment that she felt nothing, no pity for the girl, no fear, only a robotic commitment to David's will. Susannah was buried in a shallow grave just a short distance from where Mary Neilson had been laid only weeks before. The forest was slowly turning into a burial ground. Noelene was 31, a mother of 5 who was just trying to get home. On the evening of September 30th, her car spluttered and died on the Canning Highway after running out of fuel. When a white car pulled over to help, Noelene wasn't worried at all because she recognized the faces inside. Weeks earlier, David and Catherine had helped Noelene with wallpapering her home. They did this to help blend in and maintain the normal appearance of helpful neighbors. But sadly, that established trust was the ultimate betrayal. David said there was fuel back at their house in a jerry can, but when they arrived and Noelene stepped through the threshold, the atmosphere changed immediately. David locked the door and held a knife to her throat. Noelene was held for 3 days. Unlike the other victims, Noelene was held for an extended period. Because David had taken a liking to her, the typical routine of immediate violence was delayed. He treated her with a twisted form of favoritism, and jealousy quickly started to bubble to the surface. Catherine, watching from the sidelines, felt her position as David's one and only being taken away from her. The domestic space they had built became toxic. Every moment David spent with Noelene fed Catherine's growing rage. It was on October 3rd the tension had reached its breaking point. Catherine snapped, delivering an ultimatum. Either kill her, or I will kill myself. For David, losing Catherine was the only thing he feared more than the police. To appease her and reclaim the stability of their partnership, he agreed to end the competition. He chose Catherine over Nolene's life, but even still, he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Not while she was awake. Not while she was looking at him. On October 3rd, they fed Noelene a massive overdose of sleeping pills, watching as the woman who had once been their neighbor slip into a deep, drug-induced unconsciousness. Only when she was defenseless and unable to meet his gaze did they move in. Together they strangled her in her sleep. A final, brutal act to satisfy Catherine's jealousy and seal the pact. Denise was 21. She was a computer operator with a life full of simple responsibilities. She worked hard and spent her free time babysitting. She was also David and Catherine's last fatal victim. On a Tuesday evening in early September, she was just another commuter waiting at a bus stop on the Great Eastern Highway. She didn't get taken for any particular reason. She was taken just because she was there. The Birnies didn't see Denise as a person. To them, she was just another opportunity. At knife point, the couple forced her into the car. Unlike the others, Denise was spared from the horrors at Moorhouse Street, but instead, they drove her north to the nearby pine plantation. Here, Denise endured a nightmare of violent and sexual assault. Afterwards, David plunged the knife into her chest, stabbing her repeatedly. Once he believed it was over, they began to dig, dragging her body into a shallow trench. But as the first shovelfuls of dirt hit her, Denise moved. She was still alive, fighting for breath beneath the dirt. Maybe it was the adrenaline or the smothering from the earth, but Denise sat back up. In a fit of rage, David struck her with a shovel. When that wasn't enough, he used an axe. They buried her a second time. This time the forest stayed silent. The final victim in this sick story, Kate Moir, only 17 at the time, was walking home from a pizza shop on Sunday night. It is here that she meets the Birnies. Catherine and David had gone out so many times now. They even developed a sick code for when they wanted to go out for a hunt. She wanted another victim. So when Catherine turned to David and said, "I've got the munchies," David understood exactly what she meant. They pulled the white Toyota over, and the suburban bait worked one last time. Kate was picked up again, taken back to Moorhouse Street. In between the assaults, she was forced to dance for them, a hollow performance in a room filled with the smell of beer and stale smoke. Like the others, she was forced to write letters to her family, dictated by David, designed to explain away her disappearance so the hunt could continue uninterrupted. She was kept handcuffed to David, even as they slept. He forced her to watch movies with them, most notably Rocky, as if they were a normal family on a Sunday night. But Kate wasn't watching the movie. She was watching for a way out. When David handed her sleeping pills, hoping to sedate her for the final cleanup, Kate didn't swallow them. Instead, in an act that would save her life, she tucked them under her tongue and hid them in the bedding, maintaining a sharp, terrifying clarity while David and Catherine drifted off into a drug and alcohol-induced sleep. In the early hours while David was at work, Catherine was distracted by the chaos of their lifestyle and made a fatal error. She forgot to secure Kate's chain. Kate didn't hesitate. She squeezed through a small, louvered window, her skin scraping against the glass. She hit the ground running, barefoot, dressed only in a nightgown, and bleeding from the window's edge. She scrambled over a back fence. The Birnie's Doberman gave chase, snapping at her heels in the darkness. She ran until her lungs burned, fueled by the image of the girls who hadn't made it out. And at roughly 7 a.m, she reached a small shopping strip in Willagee. She saw Bill Johnson opening his vacuum cleaner repair shop. She burst through the door, covered in blood and overcome with fear. The first police officers that Kate encountered were skeptical. A teenager in a dressing gown, hysterical, talking about chains and Rocky movies. It sounded like a drug-induced hallucination. But Detective Sergeant Hancock noticed something. Kate was specifically concerned about others, not herself. She had an extremely detailed recollection of the layout of the house. She described the specific wood grain of the bedhead where the chains were bolted. She told them about the Rocky tape, still sitting in the VCR. And most importantly, she had noticed the prescription medicine bottle on the bedside table. She had memorized the name on the label. David Birnie. And this was all confirmed when the tactical response group stormed the house. They found exactly what Kate had described. The house was a museum of evidence. They found the chains, the goodbye letters, the white Toyota parked in the driveway. It was all here. The police split their forces. One team descended on 3 Moorhouse Street, where they found Catherine, who had just returned home. She didn't put up a fight. She sat in the very house Kate had just escaped, surrounded by the physical evidence of their crimes. At the same time, officers arrived at the tyre shop where David worked. He was arrested immediately, pulled away from the tyres and the grease of his everyday life. The transition from suburban tradesman to serial killer happened in an instant, and as the handcuffs clicked, the facade evaporated. When David was brought into the Criminal Investigation Branch headquarters, he was still in his work clothes. They didn't need to interrogate him for long. One of the investigators simply laid out what Kate had told him. David's reaction wasn't one of shame, it was one of defeat, followed by a sick sense of pride. He reportedly looked at the detectives and said, "I suppose you want to know about the others then?" For Catherine, she tried to play the role of the submissive, controlled wife. She attempted to frame herself as someone who simply went along with David out of fear or loyalty. However, this didn't last long once she realized David was already talking. Soon after, the investigators would take the pair for a drive to locate the rest of the bodies. Detectives noted that the Birnies acted like a couple on a Sunday drive. They chatted about the weather and the scenery, only occasionally interrupted by David pointing out a window and saying something like, "I think it was down that track." They spoke to the detectives as if they were all part of the same team, working to solve a puzzle. There was no shame in what they had done, no empathy. Every time David faltered, Catherine would snap the directions back into place. "Not that one, David. The 3rd tree past the bridge, David." They'd pointed out the spot where Denise had sat back up from the ground, describing every detail. And when the pair would reach Noelene, this is where Catherine's mask truly came off. She told detectives about the ultimatum and admitted her jealousy, and that before the dirt went in, Catherine had reached down and thrown handfuls of sand directly into Nolene's face. She told the police she did it so that the eyes couldn't look back at them. She wanted to be the last thing that Noelene ever saw.
The last young lady's grave that Catherine Birnie took them to, she was very, very proud of that, because this was the young lady that Catherine Birnie had killed herself, and she very proudly said, "Come on, come this way, it's over here. Ah, there it is, yes it is," and then showed them the mount and then spat on it.
By the time the sun had set, all of the bodies had been found. 4 women were dead, and 4 families were left with a silence that can never be filled. One survived, Kate Moir, not just a survivor, a hero that put an end to the horror. David Birnie's world eventually shrank to the size of a prison cell because of the nature of his crimes, specifically the rape and murder of young women and children. David was a prime target for prison justice.
Hang your filthy bastard! You dog! Hang your bloody Hang your bastard!
Bloody mongrel bastard.
If I was inside there, I'll kill you.
He was placed into protective custody, isolated from everyone. In 2005, the man who had controlled so many lives decided he could no longer control his own. He died by his own hand, alone, leaving behind a legacy of cowardice and a confession that grew longer with every year he spent behind bars. Catherine Birnie still remains. She is one of the longest serving female prisoners in Australian history. Over the decades, she has asked for mercy. Her requests for release are denied year after year. And as for the house, 3 Moorhouse Street, it still stands, although completely renovated. The chains are gone. The rocky tapes were long discarded. The louvered windows in which Kate scrambled has likely been replaced. New families live within those walls, perhaps unaware of the munchies or the letters written at the kitchen table. From the outside, it is just bricks. It still looks like an ordinary home. And that's the most terrifying thing of all.